friends. Welcome, welcome. Yes, this is Paul Sims in a slightly different guise from the one you may have been used to. But you know what? Today is October the 31st, and I didn't want to turn up using my usual Thursday fare, or maybe this is my usual Thursday outfit. I'll let you guys decide on that one. But welcome, welcome. Today's webinar is called The Real Cost of MLR, and as you can see, it's quite a spooky thing. We want you to understand and overcome the failures of in-house review and fragmented processes in medical affairs. We are going to unmask, we are going to take out of the shadows, and we are going to welcome nearly 600 of you that have signed up today. And obviously, I'm very welcome to see you despite my appearances. By the way, welcome and say hello to my little friend here who's going to be accompanying me during today's session. If you haven't already done so, I want you guys to say hello using the chat window. So please do find it right now and introduce yourself. Tell us why you've decided to be here, why you've decided to join today's session, and what indeed is maybe a reason why this has been such a spooky subject for the industry as of late. So good to see some hellos coming in. I was just worried there. I was on my own, you know, the one guy who was wearing fancy dress and not told that no one else would be at the party. So, you know, just imagine for a second that your most senior medical director is spending a quarter of their week, or maybe even more, away from their primary role, not making the strategic decisions that they need to, instead reviewing content and materials. Well, that same haunting scenario might well be happening a little closer to home, as we are going to see in just a moment. And I'd be very interested to welcome our newsreader today, who's going to give us some breaking bulletin headlines, and I think you're going to find those very, very interesting. An effective MLR process should, of course, be something like a choreographed dance, you know, like a Thriller, you know, just as an example. And it's reality, it's more like a group of zombies, and we're shuffling in different directions. We're creating awkward handoffs and missteps. And I really think that we can do a lot better. So that's why we're here today. And I'm really glad that so many of you can be joining me for this conversation. Let me introduce, woo, a big scary spider. Let me introduce, get that out of the way. Let me introduce our panel today. And what I would like to say is that our panel are speaking in a personal capacity. This is obviously a subject that gets every procurement, sorry, not every compliance and regulatory team energized. Our panel are very much speaking in their personal capacity today and not necessarily representing their company. And the first person who's up in this spooky scenario is Carlos, of course. Carlos is someone who you've presumably got to know if you've been to a recent Farmageddon or a couple of our recent events. Someone who I very much have enjoyed spending a little spooky moment with from time to time as we go after the gloomy effects that medical affairs brings across our industry so much in the recent past. He is very much an innovator and someone who I've really loved getting to know recently. So glad he could be here. Also, not an MLR champion. Let's just put that out there from the beginning. And I think that makes this even more interesting. David is from the UCI School of Pharmaceutical Sciences and is really, really very welcome here. He's been stalking the halls of AstraZeneca and Allergan, of course, now part of AbbVie, as we're about to see. He was serving as VP of Global Medical Operations in that role and is bringing a huge amount of knowledge to this topic as well. David, thank you so much for being here. Mu is from AbbVie, of course. She's part of the Allergan group as well. And she's driven by the goal of inspiring confidence as well as compliance. She's a master at avoiding compliance nightmares and currently serves, of course, as Global Head of Regulatory Affairs. Thank you so much, Mu, for being here. I'd like to introduce next Jimmy. Jimmy and his team at Canopy have been a fantastic partner to work with, both in the setup of this webinar and its entire premise, and indeed in getting ready for today. I'm really excited to share what he has with you today. He's a seasoned expert in medical affairs, over 25 years of experience. He's navigated many a dark forest of product launches and centralized, decentralized business functions. And he's also the founder of GoVise, now part of Canopy. So thank you so much, guys, for being here. Before we get our panel up and running, I'm just going to show you a couple of things. You might remember that when you signed up for today's webinar, you actually answered a question. Let's have a look at the results of that question. Okay, what is the biggest bottleneck Can't read with fangs on, it turns out. What is the biggest bottleneck in your current MLR process? So you've got a few options there, and let's go through them one by one. So in order of biggest, misalignment is the number one between medical, regulatory, and commercial. Maybe no surprise there, but I think some of the other things might surprise you. The time medical directors must spend on reviews. I already alluded to that in my introduction. That's obviously a key factor. Resource constraints during product launches. That is obviously something that a lot of people are energized about. Lack of formal training, next on the list. And then finally, we've got navigating evolving regulatory guidelines. So there's the results, as scary as they are, all together. That was the first question. There is another question. I think my camera may have decided to freeze, but I'm still here, I promise you, and I'll fix that in a moment. How does your organization primarily manage MLR responsibilities? Well, MLR tasks are outsourced to specialized third parties. Only 3.9%. Really, really interesting that I found. A very small number of you. The next one on the list, we're actively exploring alternative approaches to improve MLR process. And then we use a mix of internal resources and external partners. Next up, a dedicated internal resource responsible for MLR. And then finally, the biggest of all, medical directors handling MLR as part of their broader duties, not a specialized role. That's really interesting to me. A little bit sad, perhaps. There's the results all together now. And I think that provides the perfect spooky stage for what we're going to be talking about today. One more thing, we are recording today's session. It will be available to you afterwards, so you don't need to ask me for a recording. Let's invite the panel to turn their cameras on and show us what they've decided to dress up as today. There we go. Look at them. Look at that. So beautiful. Thank you so much, guys, for being part of this conversation. Yes, it does look like my camera's broken, so I will fix that in just a second. Okay, now the panel are raring to go, but to give them something really interesting to talk about, I'm actually going to get the first of the new polls up and running while we speak. So if you have a look at your screen right now, it'll appear. Who should hold the primary accountability for ensuring compliance and preventing mistakes is the first question. And then secondly, on average, roughly how much time do you think medical directors dedicate to MLR-related activities each week? So please do answer those two questions. I can see about a quarter of you have done that already. That's fantastic. Now, the first thing I'm actually going to do is ask Jimmy to share his screen. As I said, we've got something pretty exciting and interesting to share with you. So, Jimmy, the news headlines are up. Over to you.
Amazing. Hello, good day and good evening. I'm your news anchor, Jimmy Overton, and welcome to another Canopy Breaking News Special Report Halloween edition. Tonight, we have breaking news and in-depth coverage of the biggest stories impacting medical review, MLR, medical affairs, and beyond. In today's top story, we bring you some frightful and fascinating insights into the world of medical promotion review, where accuracy is key, compliance is critical, and the stakes are terrifyingly high. In a chilling new discovery, a survey of 556 pharmaceutical companies and medical device companies have revealed just how stretched medical review teams are. This survey had just over a 7% response rate, with 42 unique companies participating. So, what was uncovered, and how should it be addressed? Well, it starts with a twist. The new survey shows that 44% of medical affairs departments rely on their medical director for promotional reviews, while only 15% have a dedicated medical review role. Medical information was the second most likely to pull the assignment, coming in at just 23%. Despite previous data highlighting this role, that it was primarily outside of the medical director role, this data shows that is not the case. You heard it right, but regardless of where the role sits, many are pulling double duty, putting their projects and strategic objectives at risk. Some participants, and I quote, say, medical review is a nightmare. But wait, there's more. time spent on those reviews is a ghastly challenge. For those without a dedicated reviewer, the report shows that many are spending over 25% of their week on promotional review alone. That's a bone-chilling 10 to 15 hours per week just on review. Additionally, 2 out of 3 respondents are spending at least 15% of their week reviewing materials. Shocking indeed. Medical directors are known to be high-value resources, and using their time on repetitive content review can be an inefficient allocation. MLR reviews involve multiple rounds and checking detail-oriented adjustments, so we ask the question, when do medical directors have time to focus on tasks with a higher impact on strategic decision-making? That answer, and many like it, cannot wholly be answered or addressed in this news report. It is, however, predicted by experts that this problem will continue to compound. Medical affairs departments report increasingly expanding their content creation in efforts to support the field's evolving needs, particularly to meet the needs of real-time, personalized engagement, often omni-channel, with healthcare professionals or HCPs. This increase in content generation has placed additional strain on existing review processes that reportedly will continue to grow. In many reports, the adoption of modular content approaches have helped streamline some of these processes, but many organizations still struggle with the regulatory and compliance challenges tied to the high volume of content that must be reviewed and approved. And let's not forget the importance of training. Surprisingly, in this report, only 62% of companies have formal training, specifically for the medical review function. Sources indicate that medical directors have extensive medical knowledge, but notably, MLR review requires specialized skills, interpreting regulatory guidelines, ensuring compliant language, and understanding the nuances of promotional and non-promotional content. It is accepted that MLR reviewers should have specific trainings and apply both evidence standards, regulatory prowess, and compliance knowledge. It is widely known that MLR requires a thorough understanding of this complex regulatory requirements set forth by the FDA or EMA. Additionally, over 42% of companies report that there is no soft skills training, with just 50% of companies reporting that even the most fundamental training on good documentation practices was covered. The potential impact of this is lack of investment in soft skills can be associated with ineffective cross-team communication, lack of trust, and suboptimal outcomes. But what about our preparation and support at launch? Our exclusive report shows that in the high-stakes environment of product launches, 69% of companies are forced to stretch their existing resources to handle the surge in promotional review needs. It's been reported that many medical affairs teams are already under pressure, even before the haunting demands of a launch. This is consistent with other recent abstracts reporting in one such survey that 50% of medical affairs functions found that funding for this role was difficult to very difficult. Moreover, in the same report, 70% of medical affairs leaders articulated that it was difficult to very difficult to obtain headcount to support commercial for this critical role. So as we digest these findings, what can we take away from this? The medical director role is the most common role supporting medical promotion review, followed by medical information. And close to 1/3 of participants are spending greater than 25% of their time reviewing material, which highlights the resource impact on the medical director role, which is typically focused on broader company strategic objectives. The results also underscore the need for formal training for those supporting medical promotional review. Moreover, over 20% of respondents reported they do not have a backup reviewer. in case an assigned reviewer is out for leave of absence, family leave, vacation, etc. These new findings highlight that key resources for medical review are not added by medical affairs during launch. This means the existing resources are stretched to meet the expanded needs of the commercial team, leading some to believe that medical affairs may be underserving them at this critical time. That's all for tonight's report. Remember, in the world of medical review, vigilance and expertise keep the chills at bay. Stay compliant, stay accurate, keep the patient first, and have a fantastic Halloween. Paul, back to you.
Wow, thank you so much. That was a positively frightening update from our resident newsreader. Thank you so much, Jimmy. You're getting some applause from the crowd. I don't think many newsreaders get that, so that's a pretty good sign. One final thing to do before letting the rest of the panel in is to just close out this poll. So thank you so much to everybody who answered that. I will just get the results up and running. You had to obviously reply to this before you saw Jimmy's stats there on just how much it is taking medical directors, and you've got the second question at least there is showing you what people are thinking, but it might be even worse than that according to Jimmy's survey. And then obviously the first question, who should hold the primary accountability, is up and running. Right, so panel, you've been waiting very patiently. You've seen a lot of shocking stuff, including, my outfit. What is most energizing you right now, and why is this so hard for us to get right? Please let us know your perspectives.
My first time here, and I just want to say it's amazing how good the reception is, even out here in the Orion sector. I heard that newscast loud and clear. I would say that the findings are not necessarily surprising. From my perspective, I think that really resourcing is always such a challenge, and I saw it come up in the chat as well. And that often is what's driving some of the pressures and why it's so difficult to get that balance right, especially for smaller companies or companies just starting out. You oftentimes rely on your experts, your medical affairs team, to wear multiple hats. And as a result, because you are trying to be efficient, there isn't that investment into something that is such a core function of the organization. And I do think that part of the reason is that early on there may not be visibility of when we actually need to get materials out there, but as you get into the stage where you have active products, where you actually are needing to get these approvals and developing materials, that's where that investment is so critical, especially for larger organizations. I think flexibility is so important, where you can reapply and redeploy assets as you get towards launch phase or not. And this is also where I was surprised that such a small number of companies or survey respondents indicated that they use outsourced capacity, because in my mind, maybe some of the companies have a blend where they bring in outsource to augment, but it's just such a efficient way to allow you to, again, flex kind of that capacity that you have supporting your brands and your products.
Thank you. More comments, please.
So I'll go next, Paul. If it was a different topic, I would go first.
Fair.
No, I mean, I want to take a step back. Definitely, there's a lot of talk about resources, about time, about maybe inefficiencies. And maybe the best thing is to start very basic, in case not the whole audience is fully aware of why we do MLR to start with, or why does it exist. I would say, to make it simple, for me, it's the 3 C's. So it's compliance, clarity, and credibility, right? And all that material that needs to go out, we need to make sure that we're bridging the scientific accuracy with also responsible communication, because the setbacks could be big and huge on companies if communication that is not accurate or that's not clear goes out. So it's sort of, okay, maybe we don't want to invest a lot of time and effort, but then you invest a lot to handle all the lawsuits that may come up, or the consequences. So it's kind of a choice of where do you want to start investing. You want to invest before the problem happens, or do you want to invest after the problem happens? Now, the one thing I just want to end with in terms of thoughts is the real question that I would like to bring is it that we need to invest more in the process, or is it that we need to make sure that the teams understand the process to start with, so that the medical director does not need to use 20% of his time to review material if that material to start with was properly made? I mean, let's look at the commercial teams. They should have accurate knowledge and appropriate knowledge of laws, of regulations, of how things need to be created. And the same thing for the agencies that support them, to avoid having so much time being spent by medical directors to review and the back and forth that is happening. So that is the point that I would like to bring in for the discussion, and happy to hear also the thoughts and ideas of the rest of the panel.
Amazing. Thank you, Carlos. Some throwing down the gauntlet challenges there. Mo, you're up next.
Sure, Carlos, that's a great point. And before I get into my spiel, I just want to introduce myself as Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I'm here to come back from the grave to save America and also to save MLR. Carlos, great point. I think so often we're so quick to blame the process, but it's actually the training on the process and people's knowledge on the process that's more of the issue. So I'm a huge proponent of putting people where they provide the most value, right? And Jimmy, I think that your survey hit on that. Are medical directors the right people to be in MLR or PRC? And what I've recognized is, while having the clinical experience is phenomenal, what we really need in MLR is somebody who understands the difference between substantial evidence, adequate evidence, the level of evidence that's really needed to make a claim. And as a regulatory reviewer, I really rely on my medical colleagues to give me that information. I may know the regulations, but I don't know the data inside and out. And so that's really what we're looking for. Like, who knows the data inside and out, and who can evaluate that data and give us a clear judgment of whether or not it reaches a threshold necessary to make a specific claim. So that's what I would look at when determining whether or not it should be a medical director or somebody who's specifically trained for MLR versus somebody who's outsourced, who's trained to do this type of analysis. I'm in an interesting position because I actually started my career in medical. I started in medical information at a company where the medical directors were initially doing promotional review. And they quickly realized that the person who was responding to unsolicited requests from physicians had all the information on current publications, the data, et cetera. And that person might be more well-equipped to evaluate MLR materials versus somebody who's a medical director who's basing it off of their own clinical experience. So I was one of the first people at Bayer at the time to start doing MLR from a medical perspective, from medical information. And contrary to so many other opinions here, I absolutely love MLR. I fell in love with MLR at the time and realized the value of somebody being very specialized for MLR, and then eventually made my way to regulatory. So I absolutely, my opinion is that it should be somebody who is specialized to do MLRC or PRC, who does the medical review versus a medical director, but fully understanding that sometimes we may need to defer to a medical director to understand the clinical relevance and establish the clinical relevance. But as a regulatory reviewer, that's my opinion.
Paul, if I can add on to what Mo was sharing, I think it's so important, and it's always great when you find those individuals that not only are good at MLR, but enjoy it, find it that it's such a core responsibility. And having that consistency is also an important piece, because oftentimes when you have positions, especially if the workload is assigned to, let's say, a more junior member of a medical team, those folks are looking for advancement. And then you start getting the disconnects once people move into new opportunities, or when you get different folks now involved and they don't really remember what decisions, what agreements have been made in the past. So I think what Mo described is so important, that training, as both Mo and Carlos indicated, it's critical to give them a good foundation. And sometimes when you have folks that maybe see it more as a transitional opportunity rather than a career that they want to pursue, you lose some of that consistency and that focus.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. Back to our newsreader, I'd like to, you look across across clients, across companies, and I would love to hear what it is that you have to propose that the challenge is, and that where we need to get better in, Jimmy.
Yeah, I have some thoughts that I want to share and maybe introduce some additional controversy for discussion. Would you like me to move to the slide deck at this point?
Please feel free. Actually, just before you do, Rena's a good friend, and she asks, couldn't regs be learnt by medical reviewers? That's what happens in the UK, where regulatory and legalists are not reviewers. So I just want to quickly tackle that one before we move forward. And by the way, lots of you are writing just to me, which is lovely, but take your little blue drop-down box off hosts and panelists and change it to everyone so that we can all see the interesting insights that you're sharing. So that's hopefully given you a moment to think of a response to Rena's reply. Do you want to reply to her?
Yeah, I'm happy to reply. I completely agree. Absolutely, the regs could be learned by medical reviewers, and I think they should be known by medical reviewers. I think sometimes it's helpful, depending on the company, to have a checks and balances system, to have regulatory be the ones who are, once again, depending on the company, depending on the therapeutic area, sometimes it's helpful to have regulatory being the ones who are communicating with the health authorities, and being very specific just to the regulations. But absolutely, I think the medical reviewers should be trained on the regulations, and they should be speaking to the regulations when evaluating the data. So 100%. I think it differs from country to country, as to how specific those needs are and how well they should be trained. But 100%, I think Jimmy also referred to this in his study. Absolutely, the medical reviewers should know the regulations as well and should be trained on it.
Okay.
Yeah, if I could interject as well, Mo,
Yeah,
I
go for it.
think over time, I have hired a recovering regulatory reviewer on occasion for medical review, and the reverse has happened. I know there are medical reviewers that came through the same pathway you did. The thing that I think is common between those two groups is that they have a passion and understanding and unique ability to navigate this environment and enjoy it. And many times this role is just assigned because it's part of just a broader part of your role versus having a core passion or acumen for it, where that much time is invested in ensuring that you are up to speed on the regulations and have a core competence in review, not necessarily either one of those direct pathways. And both of them can get you there.
Okay. And Jimmy, do you want to stick with you and show us a couple more things you've got something to share? Amazing. There we go.
Let's see. Well, I think the first thing I'd like to address is kind of what we're all talking about, and that's the specialized training. In 2018, the FDA had a new guidance, a relatively new guidance that came out called the CFL guidance. I remember many hours spent debating, discussing, interpreting, both on the medical review side and on the regulatory side to better understand what was the intention behind this. How does this change what we're doing now? Does it change what we're doing now? In 2023, there was the SIUU, or Scientific Information on Unapproved Uses, and that also was not controversial, but did require some discussion to understand that interpretation. We've used some terms here earlier. I think it was perhaps Mo. What's substantial evidence? What's scientifically sound and clinically relevant? What's scientifically appropriate and statistically sound? Or what in the heck are CARS and competent and reliable scientific evidence? And where do they apply in each case? These items sit in medical. The interpretation of what might meet the hurdle of those and how they could be used sits in medical. And it is a partnership with regulatory. But when I look at the opportunity here related to training and keeping your staff up to date, specialized training is required. And this is before we even put a medical director who may or may not have had a lot of exposure to this arena and start talking about Facebook or TikTok or maybe even Instagram and how that data may or may not hold up in those environments. And so I think it is a full-time or at least a dedicated type of commitment in the ideal model. And I know we're not all staffed for that. However, we're here to talk about what models seem to work and what are the benefits and risks associated with those. Training and negotiation skills is also critical. A lot of this trust can be created around not understanding how to communicate in this highly, arguably sometimes contentious, negotiative environment. So the first thing I'd like to call out is we need specialized training. I often say that you can take a 2-hour course on how to become a plumber, but at the end of 2 hours, a plumber you will not be. This requires more than just a quick visit or even clinical acumen. It takes time, experience, hands-on exposure, and situational exposure to identify issues and know how to solve them. So while some formal training, I think, can be beneficial, it's a little more complicated than that. It's really much closer to an apprenticeship for the experience for most of the reviewers that I've put into position in previous models. The next thing I'll talk about is launch readiness. I've always been a bit baffled by the lack of internal support on the medical affairs side to allocate resources. I mean, after all, commercial has their product. They're ready to launch. They are calling upon medical and regulatory to help support them to try to get the best value proposition that's appropriate for their drug. And we meet them with, we'll just use what we already have, despite the fact that they have hired 2 new agencies, 3 new brand managers, and have an entire campaign planned out over the next 6 months. So remember, medical affairs is also experiencing a launch at this time. So they have their own key objectives and their own strategic drivers in parallel with this. So sharing or pulling those same resources or adding it to the current responsibilities, I think, is not ideal. And I think as a best practice, we should consider as a part of our medical affairs launch planning to ask for the resources to make sure we can execute for commercial as a part of a launch and have that be part of your proactive launch readiness plan. Now, if we look at models to consider, I've worked in all of them and I've experienced all of them. So there's the non-dedicated MLR model where there is a high risk of competing priorities. Anyone who supported a launch knows, or even a shift in focus related to a promotional campaign, understands the extensive time demands that are going to be asked of them to meet the promotional and even non-promotional needs. And this non-dedicated support requires each team member, often siloed in different departments as part of someone's job, to stay current on the latest regulatory guidelines, understand the involving interpretations. And frankly, this can be especially challenging with the competing priorities, and each team member needs to relearn it. In contrast, if you have a dedicated review model, and I saw, Paul, that a significant number of people did, or at least a small number, maybe it was close to a third, I think that is a better model. The MLR reviewer will typically bring a more specialized experience, understanding of the requirements, current guidelines, as this is their dedicated role in this case. And this focus makes them better equipped, I think, to handle aggressive timelines without competing priorities. Interestingly, on the regulatory side, the dedicated role is fairly common. I've rarely met a strategic regulatory scientist whose primary strategic role is to advise on the regulatory pathway for a new compound, say, excuse me, I need to run into the promotional review meeting because I cover that as well. It's typically divided into some core competencies, and those core competencies are typically have their own dedicated and centralized reporting structures. So I think that's just a little insight related to 2 models and some of the benefits and risks associated with it. Again, I've worked in both models, and I believe, if possible, and if you can get the support in your organization to have a dedicated MLR team member or reviewer, will enhance the quality, efficiency, and elevates the overall function, which I think in terms elevates commercial's ability to communicate science to patients appropriately. So my vote here between the 2 models, if I had my preference, and the support internally, which is a big if, I would vote for the dedicated staffing model. But most of the time organization often hesitate because in a dedicated model, it's hard to understand what staffing is required. This work waxes and wanes. And if you're dedicated to it and you have a slow month or you're in between campaigns, how do you staff for that work? On the other side, if it's more than the 40 or 50, let's face it, 60 hours a week associated with a launch, I think that also makes it difficult to staff that dedicated model because the work can be unpredictable. If we look at two other components, we can talk about the centralized or the decentralized model. And again, I've had the chance to work and operationalize this in both. I strongly favor the centralized approach. In the decentralized model, where each therapeutic area manages their own resources independently, I've seen the consequences of that, which generally lead to inconsistencies in content review or standards of evidence, leading to varied advice across teams for very similar claims and data. Now, you don't want to go down to the cafeteria and find out that one therapeutic area got something based on a certain level of evidence, but the other therapeutic area was told no for the same or similar level of evidence and similar claims to support it. So this lack of alignment can be problematic at the organizational level when it's decentralized. But we operate in reality, and in reality, a decentralized model might be the best that can be put forth with the staffing and the current models within an organization. So if you have a decentralized model, I strongly advocate that you create a cross-team forum by which you can collaborate, share learnings, and try to build alignment for the organization. And this forum enables reviewers to share best practices, discuss current issues, and importantly, stay up to date on FDA interpretations and other things to help foster that better consistency. But on the other hand, my favored model is the centralized function, which I have seen firsthand significantly improves consistency and guidance across TAs, increased awareness because they report to a similar team, and they're more flexible from a staffing standpoint. And here I'm speaking about resource allocation. Again, what happens when one therapeutic area is 4 years away from their next launch and their campaigns are pretty much a steady state, but your other reviewer in a completely different therapeutic area is drowning with 2 new approvals? How is it that you can better manage the resources that you have? And one way is if they're centralized, you don't have the burden of I report to this team or I report to this team. You focus your review talent on the most strategic objective, and you can lean people in or out that have that unique acumen more readily. And so I think that allows you to meet the high demand areas, such as product launch. And I've seen scenarios where one TA has a light workload and the other struggles with high demands. And centralization allows a better alignment of resources in those cases. And in the decentralized model, there's typically no conversation. And sometimes they don't even know who their counterpart is across the therapeutic areas. And I think that's a missed opportunity to share learnings. If we move beyond that, we can say, well, why don't we just supplement with a contractor or a hired in-house FTE? And I think use of contractors are very valuable as it relates to supporting this influx of work that's either anticipated or otherwise pressuring the team. So the model can supplement your review and help the team focus on their higher strategic objectives. And it'll help with the capacity to get through the increased work. However, in my personal experience, I've had a couple of roadblocks. Number one, some of the contracts that I've had in the past require a 40-hour work week by contract. They're contracted as full-time, and sometimes I may not have had 40 hours for that week. But more importantly, and frankly, more likely, I had 60 hours of work that week, and the contract prohibited them from continuing beyond the 40 hours, thus giving a full stop at a time where I needed a full court press. So I think the other thing that's happened is a lot of contractors that I've worked with, and this may not be universal, but my personal experience, the contract was really a way for them to break into pharma. So I get them trained, I do a mini apprenticeship, I get them oriented to the team, they learn Viva or whatever tool that is applicable, and they get integrated with the team. And then that next MSL job opens. Do you think they want the contract position or the full-time position? In this pathway, I've created many a full-time MSL out of my need to use a contractor for promotional review, because generally the full-time work is more appealing to them than any short-term contract. Last, we'll talk a little bit about specialized agencies. Again, I'm surprised that they are low. There's a relatively low utilization at this point, but I think specialized agencies are well equipped to handle the fluctuating support needs. They can adjust rapidly to high volume and even equally importantly to low volume, because typically these are fee-for-service types of events. So of note, most specialized agencies have experience across therapeutic areas, across many different launches, and importantly, across different companies, which I think gives you a unique perspective for them to provide a broader and perhaps more objective and informed feedback on your content. Plus, they're already proficient in things like Viva, review nuances, and they are up to date with regulations, because typically that's what this role is dedicated to do. So I think that's an important consideration if you're thinking about one of those models and how to supplement your review, or in this case, looking at this data, free your medical director to operationalize where they can have the most value. They typically, again, these agencies typically operate in a fee-for-service model, which ties the work directly to the needed support and the demands. And most importantly, they can allow your in-house team to confidently focus on core strategic objectives while the high volumes of work are managed for them. So that's kind of another option related to outsourcing and why that might be a valuable support model. But I think we've talked about staffing, add more staff, add more staff. I think, there are other important considerations. Frankly, adding a qualified and vetted, well-trained MLR coordinator to help operationalize and take charge of organizing the content and the workflow and ensuring the materials go smoothly from the initial draft all the way to approval is a smart option. I mean, that focused coordination really minimizes and optimizes timelines, and it helps maintain a consistent and efficient workflow. And well, I hate to say it, as a medical reviewer and a company that provides a high level of service as it relates to, and acumen as it relates to medical review support, that MLR coordinator might be the most cost-effective intervention that you can have at your fingertips. And I think sometimes it's overlooked. Now, the other thing that happens is misalignment across teams. We saw it in the survey, and it seems to be a key issue. This is where I think that space you've made for your medical director can have the most impact. That medical director or your assigned reviewer can work upstream in the process. This is where you have a real impact. Early collaboration on direction and alignment, not at the review phase where the direction's already been invested. So I really like to avoid misalignment to get in the early discussions, especially with your most vetted clinical expert or medical director. Get them upstream in the process. And we've heard this on other webinars. And then lastly,
sorry, Jimmy, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we've gone over by a fair bit.
Okay, please.
I need to give some time to our panel to discuss. I mean, don't let me get in your way. That was absolutely fascinating and utterly great. But I really want to be able to hear the other reactions to this before we finish today. We've only got about 13, 14 minutes remaining. If you look at your screen right now, I really want to get also the audience's view, direct view on exactly what your opinion is on what Jimmy's just been saying. So you can see workload distribution as a question there. How does your organization cope with the increased workload? And then secondly, what model do you see as most effective for your MLR processes over the next 12, 24 months, and give you the chance to select, maybe influenced by Jimmy, I don't know. We'll have to see whether or not he has managed to convert anybody, or indeed how we should have done this poll at the beginning and the end, I guess. But it'd be really interesting to see where your views are. Panel, I would like to get, there's a lot that Jimmy just put forward. I want to hear your reactions to what you thought was the most, well, what you think will move the needle most in your organization, and how we actually get this to be sustainable better, because a lot of you seem to be on the same page, but there's some key points of difference that seem to be holding us back. So please give us your reactions.
Yeah, and just to clarify, I will not be talking about anything related to the organization.
Indeed.
But I was looking at some of the comments, and I mean, if we need to really tailor our discussion to the audience, we have small companies, mid-sized and large companies. Maybe not everyone can afford outsourcing. Maybe not everyone can afford incorporating AI, which are definitely solutions looking at the future. And I'm sure we'll discuss more and more AI. I've seen firsthand a lot of solutions that incorporate AI, but of course not the final accountability, or else we will all be in jail if we just depend on AI now, maybe in the future. But I think we need to still address something. You know, it's like you have a nail in your leg, and then all you do is get antibiotics, anti-inflammatories, bring a group of surgeons to discuss, you know, what you need to do. Just pull the nail out, right? So there are certain things that do not cost money that people can start doing in order to make the process more efficient. One is, as we said, training and awareness to everyone, not just the one who needs to approve. So the people who are creating the content, the people who are doing everything from agencies to commercial teams to the reviewers as well. And the second thing which I do, and I feel it's very efficient, is medical is not the last step in content creation. Why not take the medical director with you on the journey of the content creation? Co-create, work as one team, and then if medical has the input since the beginning and they are working closely and they have a good notion and understanding of the regulatory requirements, like for example in the UK, you don't need to really suffer at the stage of approval because medical was with you along the way. The thing that we miss the most is that we work in silos, and we continue to work in silos where, you know, commercial are doing their own thing with the agency, and then medical is brought in last minute. Oh, we have only 1 week. We need to approve this content. We need to get it out. And then they blame medical for delaying the campaign of going out. And this is, for me, a huge problem that, if addressed, solves at least 50% of the suffering with MLR, along with the great options that Jimmy has mentioned. I think outsourcing is a great idea, but then outsourcing will also be a problem if they need to spend too much time fixing things that, if you aligned on at the beginning to start with, things would have been much easier for the outsourcing company. And I'll stop here.
Thank you. I'm sure Jimmy will get you back to answer that in just a second, but let's hear from Dave and Mo.
Yeah, in fact, Carlos, great points. I also saw in the comments that Shruti was actually calling out just the value of having the MLR teams be a strategic partner. It's always better when you're working with a team to have them function as a team member rather than a goalie to try to, you know, stop things that are inappropriate from going into the net. So I think that for me, that is such a critical opportunity for many organizations. I love the recommendation Jimmy had also about the coordinator, because sometimes it's undervalued what a good project manager can bring, especially when there are multiple projects, or if you have a centralized model or a shared resource modeling. The only other piece that I would add that I hadn't heard yet was really the importance of periodically having the teams conducting that work to take a look at their own metrics. So both objective as well as subjective metrics. So that's two components. One is to say, what are the actual stats? How long is it taking us to turn things around? How many things are getting re-reviewed? How many rush orders? You know, I'm getting called on my transponder here to beam me up for a late night review meeting. You know, these are the types of things that will help guide you as far as whether you're properly resourced or not. And just as importantly, on the other side, getting feedback from stakeholders. How is this going? What are the, you know, types of pieces that are going through? Are you satisfied? Is it delivering on our strategy? I think ultimately, you know, what the patients benefit from would be information on how to use the products most appropriately. And I think that this is a key group to do that. So I think the metrics are important.
Yeah. So Mo, just before you speak, I'm just going to end the poll and share the results in case that is an interesting factor for you to comment on as well. How does your organization cope? We can see more than half of people chose our existing staff are simply absorbing the additional workload, even more frightening stuff that we are indeed laying bare for us today. And then second part, looking ahead, what model do you see as most effective? Well, centralizing MLR with a dedicated internal team gets nearly a third of the vote, but 39% say implementing a hybrid model. Is that people sitting on the fence, maybe? I don't know. I don't know. In these days, hybrid is perfectly acceptable, of course. But interesting that the third-party provider is only 12%. And decentralizing only 2%. So I thought that was very interesting as well. So Mo, over to you, and feel free to comment on the poll as well if you want.
Well, as RBG, I just have to say that I have to remind everybody that we're in a very litigious environment, and so I completely agree that medical needs to be up to date on all the enforcement and all the regulations. And along with what Dave and Carlos mentioned, Dave, I love your analogy of medical not being the goalie, or MLR not being the goalie, that we should be in the entire process from beginning to end. So I really advocate for medical, regulatory, legal, everybody being part of the brand planning process, part of the entire life cycle of the entire product until you get to promotion, so that they can really be a strategic partner. Because as we all know, when we get the issues at the very last minute, it's difficult to make the changes and save money by the time the agencies have already spent all the money to create the pieces. So it would be really advantageous for the entire company, for commercial MLR, for everyone, for MLR to be involved from the very beginning. But the main point I wanted to stress is that everybody needs to know what the regulations are, not just medical, not just regulatory, but also commercial, and that would avoid much of the costs the terrible costs that we're trying to save.
Yeah, well, we've had a conversation about the realism of everybody knowing. I mean, I often use sports as an analogy. Everybody needs to be able to know the rules of the sport if they're going to be good at playing that sport, right? But at the same time, is there a cutoff point where we can't expect everybody in the organization to become well, one thing, of course, that can help us potentially is technology, and the AI phrase has come up quite a lot in the comments, but not really so much yet in the conversation. So let's just start again with our audience, and what you'll see in a second is a poll. It's actually another two-parter on AI is coming up. Where do you believe AI offers the most significant advantage for MLR processes in the next 12 to 24 months? So where do you think? And of course, you're going to want to tick every single one, but I'm evil and it's Halloween, so you're only going to be able to choose one. Sorry about that. And number two, if AI-assisted review introduces an error, because inevitably it will, who do you believe is responsible for addressing the compliance breach? And of course, you could give me the by the book answer to that question, but I kind of want the in practice and who's really going to be carrying the can in reality type answer to that question, if you can move beyond just the rules and regulations for that particular question. It'd be really interesting to see your responses. Jimmy, I want to come back to you. What is your attitude to the use of technology, and how should we be embracing it without taking too much of a backseat, as of course it takes over and becomes the Terminator universe that we don't want to see?
Well, I think any technology, whether it's AI or otherwise, can reliably pre-screen content, and that could really boost productivity. I mean, reviewers and MLR teams might be able to review that content faster if there's some kind of pre-review or matching system to check the data. But AI tools for content screening aren't really new. They've been around for a long time, and from what I've seen, their success has been somewhat limited in this arena. I think the common challenges are that they don't integrate that well with current content management systems, and many require you to offload your data onto a cloud or someplace to be analyzed, and then bring it back after it's been analyzed. And frankly, that would create multiple sources of the truth and the potential for inconsistency and reliability in the results and the management of that. But that being said, I can tell you that with the advancements in AI, companies like ours are very invested in developing viable commercial solutions in this space. I do think I saw one thing in the chat, though. The good news here is that there are steps that can be taken now that aren't AI or pre-screening that can have a real impact. I mean, building and maintaining a claims library is just easy to do or reasonably easy to do. Vetting and referencing those scientific platforms, if you're on the medical affairs side, to get these blocks of content that can be pushed together in different manufactured or combined in different ways that might require an MLR light rather than reinventing the claim every time over and over again. So despite the AI readiness today, and I don't think it's going to be really replacing that final review, I do think there are other things that can be done.
Okay. We are fast running out of time, and I want to share the results of this question already because I think the results are quite quick. And we've just got really time for the panel to do a sentence each on this topic, but I really do want to hear that sentence. So guys, you can hopefully see the results appearing on your screen as well. Feel free to comment on them or not. You can see we've got quite a wide spread of answers on the first question of where we believe AI offers the most advantage. Interesting that there's no sort of out-and-out winner there. And then obviously on question 2, we've got nearly 40% of people saying the person who conducted the final human review of the material. That assumes, of course, there is a human. Let's not go there, I guess. And then the entire team getting nearly a third of the vote as well, which I didn't expect to see. I thought that was, again, another very on-the-fence type of answer, but maybe that's where we all choose to be. Comments from the panel on AI? I'm so sorry, but we're running out of time. You're going to have to be quick.
I think it's everybody's responsibility to report any issues with AI because the whole goal is to make AI smarter, right? And so anytime you see an issue, if we report it back to the system or report it back to the person who's controlling the system, it makes AI smarter and it'll be more successful for you in the future. So anybody that notices something wrong should report it back.
Yeah, fantastic. I think, Carlos, were you talking as well?
No, so again, if we look at AI, it should be as a co-pilot, being able to highlight some major findings or things that the algorithm has been taught, but of course not a final reviewer. And just a quick answer to Rena, by the way, who I enjoyed your presence at Pharmageddon, and hopefully we can meet again. The medical who's going on the journey doesn't need to be the reviewer. So sometimes you do have another reviewer for objectivity. But my point was to make sure that everything is created cross-functionally and there is input from medical, because sometimes you can find data that supports the commercial team much more than the data that they have looked at. So just differentiating that. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. Dave?
Hey, Paul, just a quick comment. I would say that we don't need to necessarily think of AI being applied broadly. Certainly it may have that capability in the future for repetitive tasks to really expedite reviews or comparing version changes. I think that's where AI can be brilliant and very straightforward in helping identify, what's changed since last version. So there might be selected tasks where it can be applied more judiciously. But I agree with many of the comments. At the end of the day, it's still going to require someone to make sure that what's going out is matched with the risk tolerance of the company as well as the regulations.
Okay. So, Jimmy, I'm just going to give you one final 10-second closing out ability to say if there's one thing that you would wish that everybody would do, emphasize on Monday morning that they did when they came back in the office and it's no longer Halloween and we're looking towards a bright future again. What is it, the one most important thing you'd love to see everybody do?
Yeah, I think we have seen that there's some dysfunction or at least a lack of resourcing as it relates to this medical review issue. Content is part of the issue, but actually the resourcing and the training required for this, it is important. Our commercial teams count on us to be in a mode to fully invest in their campaign. It's not just the side of someone's responsibility or part of it. It's an actual commitment, and that brings good communication to patients. And if we're putting patients first, I think we should be in that room and we should be contributing. But to do that, we need to be better trained. We need to be committed to the process. And it probably is not ideal to be part of someone's job. And so those are my initial thoughts. I think that everyone's had amazing things to say here. I think there's a lot to ponder and still work to improve. And I hope you found the data insightful or maybe even surprising.
Yeah, absolutely. And in many ways, more questions now than ever before, but this is a conversation that we can continue to have. It's been an absolute pleasure to have the panelists here today. Thank you so much to Dave. Thank you so much, Carlos. Thank you, Mo. Really enjoyed your insights. Jimmy, been a great pleasure experience working with you and your team, making this happen. And indeed, I'm sure we're going to carry this conversation on in some way. And as I say, let's hope for a brighter future after October 31st going forward. Let's hope that that can indeed happen. We can exorcise some of the demons that we've seen today. Thank you, everybody. An absolute pleasure. We'll see you again very soon.